Today we're looking at Theme 2, Rights and Responsibilities, for the AQA GCSE Citizenship course. We're looking at laws in contemporary society, particularly what is the point of having laws. In this session we've looked at the reason we have laws, we've explored the British legal system and how it upholds fairness and justice, we've also looked at the relationship between laws and people. We're now going to move on to look at a case study exploring the development of laws to protect homosexual couples.
Create a timeline noted down key dates that legislation was introduced.
So we're now looking at how laws have changed in the UK to protect homosexuals and same-sex couples. So in 1533, the Buggery Act forbade men from having homosexual sex, and this was seen as a capital offence. What this means is it was punishable by death. Sexual activity between women was never subject to the same legal restriction. This is not because lesbians necessarily had more rights than gay men, but because the concept of being a lesbian was actually very much neglected. The Sexual Offences Act of 1967 decriminalised homosexual acts in private between two men if they are both over 21. However, sexual activity that may exist between two females are not really addressed through any of this legislation. So you can see how the concept of lesbians would have been neglected within society. Section 28 of the Local Government Act 1988 stated that a local authority shall not intentionally promote homosexuality or publish material with the intention of promoting homosexuality, or shall not promote the teaching in any maintained school of the acceptability of homosexuality as a family relationship. What this ultimately meant in 1988, not that long ago, is that schools should not be teaching about homosexuality being an acceptable or normal relationship. This was a policy that was introduced by Margaret Thatcher and was extremely controversial. However, in 1998, the Human Rights Act was introduced. It came into force in 2000. This piece of legislation meant that articles contained in the Act were to be considered in all national laws. What that means is that every law that would ever be made in the UK had to ensure that it incorporated the articles that existed in the Human Rights Act. Article 14 states that people have freedom from discrimination. Homophobia is a form of discrimination and laws needed to be reviewed to ensure that homophobia did not exist. In fact, in 1994, the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act lowered the age of consent for homosexuals from 21 to 18, and in 2001 it was further lowered to 16. Why is 16 significant? Well, the reason why is at this point you can see that homosexuals are being treated equally by the law to heterosexual couples, because the age of consent for both heterosexual and same-sex couples are 16 at this stage under this piece of legislation. In 2002, the Adoption and Children Act removed the criteria that an application had to be by a married couple, which allows single people and homosexual couples to apply. This piece of legislation allowed homosexual couples, as well as those who are not married and single people, to actually adopt children. In 2003, Section 28, which was introduced in 1988, was repealed, another word for reversed, by Section 122 of the Local Government Act 2003. This was down to a lot of people who had campaigned against Section 28 and felt that it was very discriminatory towards homosexuals and same-sex couples. As you can see, lots of people taken to the streets to campaign to have Section 28 repealed. The Civil Partnership Act 2004 allowed same-sex couples to obtain essentially the same rights and responsibilities as civil marriage, e.g. with property, pension benefits and the ability to get parental responsibility for a partner's children. Whilst same-sex couples could get the same rights and responsibilities as those in a civil marriage, officially under UK law, same-sex couples still could not get married. The Equality Act 2010, which is an important piece of legislation that you need to be very, very aware about for the GCSE Citizenship course, identifies sexual orientation as a protected characteristic group and so are protected against discrimination. The Equality Act 2010 incorporates 116 pieces of legislation that tries to tackle discrimination. It ultimately protects 9 different characteristics. Here they are on this tree here. What we're looking at today is sexual orientation and therefore the protection of homosexuals and same-sex couples. but in another session we'll be looking at the Equality Act in more detail. The Marriage Act was passed by Parliament in 2013 and came into force in 2014, and it legalised same-sex marriage. It allowed civil partnerships to be converted into marriage and allowed married people to change their legal gender while remaining married. In 2013, Alan Turing was given a royal pardon. Let me tell you a bit more about who Alan Turing was. He was a war hero and he worked for Britain's code-breaking centre. He was crucial in cracking intercepted coded messages that enabled the Allies to defeat the Nazis in World War II. Many say without his work, World War II would not have ended as early as it did, and Alan Turing's work has had a huge impact on computing, smartphones and technology. During a time where homosexuality was illegal, he was prosecuted in 1952. He accepted treatment of chemical castration as an alternative for prison. However, the impact that chemical castration had on his body led to depression. And in turn, 16 days before his 42nd birthday, he had committed suicide from cyanide poisoning. In October 2016, the government announced a proposed Alan Turing law, which would seek to implement the change through an amendment to the Policing and Crime Bill. It will effectively act as an apology to those convicted for consensual same-sex relationships before homosexuality was decriminalised in England and Wales in 1967. As you can see, in the UK, there's been lots of legislation and laws and policies that have been put in place to protect homosexuals and same-sex couples. Here's a map that shows a range of countries where LGBT relationships are legal and illegal. As of 2016, there are still over 70 countries where LGBT relationships are still illegal, and 12 countries which have it as a capital offence, i.e. the death penalty. This is an image of a woman in India who was protesting for the rights of the LGBT community. It wasn't until September 2018 that India made it legal for same-sex sexual activities. However, in India, same-sex couples are still not allowed to get married or engage in civil partnerships.
We have reached the end of this session.
We've looked at the reason we have laws, how to ensure the British legal system upholds fairness and justice, the relationship between laws and the people, and finally the case study on the development of laws to protect homosexuality and same-sex couples. If you have any questions or you want to know a bit more, please do comment and get in contact.